There will be open lines, and of course we have some amazing updates on so many areas in the news. One of the most amazing things, I think, is just how rapidly news is changing and improving these challenges to people in every area, in the area of healthcare, in the area of every aspect you can think of. And one of the things that I'm going to be doing now daily is putting up blogs. You'll see a blog coming up today on our live stream channel after the show, after we have the information all put together in terms of what's going on. The latest news, of course, is pretty dramatic in so many different areas. The Ebola continues to spread. The Spanish priest that arrived back in Spain has died of Ebola. We now have more and more reports coming out about how dangerous it is, and of course the reports continue to show that the public health system is broken. Now India is considering the idea of limiting flights and so on, but there's no flight of people of Indian extraction from all these West African countries where Ebola is present. The lack of equipment, sterilization, lack of proper burial. In fact, they're pushing the bodies in the streets in Lagos, Nigeria, where it's the fourth largest city on earth. It's not a good situation. Hygiene will be marginal at best, and it's likely that this, at least in Africa, will be a epidemic of catastrophic proportions. Here in North America, we should be having quarantine of anybody coming in that in 2014 existed at any time in any one of these countries. So they need to be quarantined for a month with serum draw for immunological indications that they've had an infection. All the proper medical testing done to make certain that they are progressing. And, of course, our natural anti-pathogenics, Nutrimedical Silver 100, which is the only ionic silver. Don't let anybody try to market or impress you that nanoparticle, colloidal, hydroxy silver, whatever, has any power by comparison at all to Silver 100. Our Nutrimedical is the only Tesla-activated diatomic plasma form of iodine. There is no other comparison. And the Allison Med is a version that I've upgraded from German sources that's 200 milligrams more than Alamed. It's been a prescription for over 20, 25 years now in Australia, New Zealand, Great Britain, and Europe. So these are very powerful antipathogenics, and there's really no one that should be panicking over this. Now, I want to go over some of the latest news. Got an article from Dr. Kelly Brogan on sleep, why you need it and how you get it. And, of course, if you don't get sleep, not only do you not release your special hormones that regulate all of your hormonal activity in your body, but inflammation increases dramatically. Things like C-reactive protein, inflammatory markers, neurotransmitter levels crash, adrenals burn out, all kinds of bad things. So I've got a really interesting article to send you on that. That'll be posted up. And an interesting article from GreenMed.info from Sidney Ross Singer on genetically modified baker's yeast spreading obesity and diabetes. And a good guy, the epidemic of obesity is to a great extent caused by toxic food. We call it gut shock syndrome, where the gut goes into shock. The elevated blood sugar is only part of the whole problem. There are other cultures, such as that have more sugar in their diet, more highly absorbed carbohydrates, but they don't have genetically modified food, don't have minerally depleted food, don't have all these toxic preservatives, such as glyphosates, which are present as a toxin in wheat, because the wheat, of course, the companies like Monsanto tried to say that they were going to reduce the risk. So why is Monsanto's cure for world hunger cursing the world food supply? We have an update article on that written by Sayer G., the founder of GreenMed.info. And just in the news, we have 13 alternatives to Viagra that won't fall flat. Interesting article about why it's kind of like, if you want to call it the cancer of the trousers, as they call it. And the heart disease, peripheral vascular disease, neurological problems, and psychological and relational are all tied together. It's very common to see someone who has problems with impotence in males has vascular disease in their heart or elsewhere. So it's very important. Interesting study came out that running 7 minutes a day helps dramatically reduce cardiovascular disease, especially in women, but in both. So that's really important. And I usually recommend vibrational platform exercise as number one, and brisk walking is better for your joints than running, actually. I recommend speed walking on a treadmill after vibrational exercise, at least 10 to 20 minutes a day. The heart of the Ebola outbreak, of course, is a village that we'll be talking about further. experiments with Ebola drugs on its way in Liberia, and of course Glaxo is starting on clinical trials dealing with a lot of their new drugs, and of course they've considered it ethical now to release these drugs to the public. So that's kind of interesting. What I think is dramatic is that people don't realize just how serious some of these epidemics are and how quickly they're going to spread. The Nadala Ngima, Sierra Leone, is where the apparently outbreak started, and of course we know that the U.S. Center for Disease Control has patents on Ebola. A number of companies have come out from Burnaby, BC, to the ZMAP, which is in Southern California, grown in tobacco. And there's not obviously enough to supply anybody. If it was a positive sera that could block it, what I recommend are antipathogenics and public health measures such as quarantine, proper safety, and infection measures. This is what, by the way, wiped out the polio. It wasn't wiped out by vaccines, it was by hygiene. It was hygiene that caused the problem with the expansion of these diseases, including after the 14th century fall of the tally stick system for finances and the collapse of the economic system that resulted in the Black Death. It was caused by pestilence, caused by an economic downturn. So Glaxo is also starting clinical trials on its Ebola vaccine. What the vaccine that they're doing, and this is quite disturbing, it's similar to the Gardasil vaccine. They take an adenovirus, and they then take this vaccine and insert two genes so that your cells will generate the Ebola antigen or protein. So your body's generating a protein that's foreign. We don't know if these specific genes have promoter or other genes in there that are unstable that can jump around your chromosomes and switch on and off genes, which we know Gardasil caused autoimmune diseases and other serious health problems, including death. So I expect that even if these vaccines were safe, which I would highly doubt that they're going to be safe, they could cause, in some people, quite dramatic immune reactions and death. We don't know. What we do know is that unstable genes, if they're inserted along with these vaccines, are going to persist in tissues, although they'll say it won't. And the persisting genes can cause gene imbalances, turning on and off chromosomes, and cause all kinds of problems. And the Ebola outbreak, says an expert, experimental drug on the way from the U.S. In Liberia. They've been asking for it. There's 1,013 people have died from the Ebola outbreak. I know a lot of people say that other diseases like TB and malaria are more common, but the likelihood of increasing to an exponential level makes it considerably more dangerous than existing malaria, which has been there for years and a constant cause of death. It's possible that in the next year or so that Ebola will dramatically increase to hundreds of thousands of cases dead, or even millions. So to just dismiss it and say that it's less causes of death than, say, tuberculosis or malaria is pretty specious. It's not a good argument. And the Spanish priest who died with Ebola in a Madrid hospital, age 75, Miguel Parejas, first European infected by a strain of Ebola that has killed more than 1,000 people. So bioethicist and Ebola treatment to the West is troubling, bad science. So ZMAP is not the answer to Ebola epidemic ravaging West Africa, and no chance of getting enough. In fact, what's happening is they are going to ramp up production to only 100 doses, and it'll only go to missionaries or to Americans. It's not going to go to these third world countries. So it will ravage them and kill a lot of people, and of course it's also going to shut down their commerce in these countries that certainly can't suffer any further destruction to their economy. Nigeria has a big economy because it's a very large oil and gas producer. One of I think it's the largest one in Africa. So when we come back, we'll take your questions on any topic, health, geopolitics, etc. We have other news items to talk about. We're going to talk about nutraceuticals and our latest updates. Special guests coming on, and any suggestions you have to improve the program in any way, 800-259-5791, 800-259-5791. We'll be back in just a moment. Welcome back, and a little bit more news review this morning before we get into wellness nutraceuticals. The U.S. jobs are now paying 23% less today than they did in 2008. That's kind of a topic opener if people want to call in about that specific issue. Report listed on Monday by the United States Conference of Mayors, so that's interesting. The report found $93 billion in lost wages, the jobs lost during the recession paid average of 61,637. As of 2014, jobs in the same sectors paid an average of 47,171. So, yes, the middle class is being systematically, how can I say, wiped out, dropped. It's hard to say how significant it is. And now let's get into some of the nutraceuticals, and we're going to talk about wellness. We have lots of challenges every day. In fact, I even get veterinary questions. I had an interesting one this morning from one of our favorite ladies who calls in about her horse, and apparently she had sold a horse. Horse was one of these steeplechase type of horses. It's, a champion, obviously. Developed some health problems with a swollen leg. What you have to understand is whether it's animals or humans, the biology is not significantly different. That when you have acute swelling, you have to think of lymphangitis in a person in your leg, or vasculitis. And one of the best tests, and this is what I recommend people do first with their conventional doctor, well, not first, but one of the things they should do to document what's going on. If you've got an acutely swollen leg, you need to get a NEVA, N-E-V-A, arterial and venous study to see if you have an arterial blockage, which is very common. If you take males over age 40, 1 in 20 has a blocked artery. We're talking about near 100%. And they're using collateral blood supply only. And then, of course, if you look at lymphangitis, the lymphatics can be inflamed, and you can also have vasculitis of the veins. Varicosities can be inflamed. That's why you can get burning in your leg. You can get blockage of varicose veins, and if you end up with enough inflammation, you'll lose the valves that control the stacks of blood, because there's little valvelets every so many centimeters along veins that allow the blood to flow in one direction, which is why movement is so good, why massage is so good to try to move lymphatic vessels. They have little valvelets too. So that's another important point there in terms of health issues. I get a lot of requests from people wanting to know what kind of health issues are going to be able to be dealt with by nutraceuticals, and say, look, we want to integrate the best of medicine, the best of functional medicine. So let's say, for example, we look at adrenal dysfunction. I posted up a new update on adrenal support gland, which gives you an idea of a summary. The adrenal glands are the stress glands, and when your thyroid is stressed, so is your adrenal glands. And excess fear, food allergies, glyphosates, gluten sensitivity, too much or too little exercise, inadequate sleep, infections, caffeine, excess of caffeine. Some caffeine is probably good, but a little bit too much is bad. Lack of nutrient-dense food, psychological stress, all these can cause adrenal glands, which are sitting on top of your kidney, not to produce enough hormones. Now, the adrenals are controlled from the brain, the hypothalamus, which connects to the anterior pituitary gland. And then it sends the signal through the autonomic nervous system to the adrenals. And there are several components to the adrenal glands. There are the glucocorticoids, like cortisone, counteract insulin and raise blood sugar. So if you don't have adequate cortisol levels, and I discovered when I was doing insulin glucose tolerance tests, we measured cortisol levels. We found that people had hypoglycemia 100% of the time. And this is someone no one else has published, but I can say this on air. 100% of the time, hypoglycemics have hypocortisolemia, we call postprandial or after meals. It can be anywhere from half an hour to 3 hours or more. And if you measure their serum cortisol at the time when they're having the hypoglycemic attacks, their blood sugar can be absolutely rock normal. They'll have a surge of noradrenaline and adrenaline, which you can also measure in their urine and their blood. But you'll see their cortisol level drop like a rock. In fact, it may not even be measurable at all. We found all of the hypoglycemics that we tested with insulin glucose tolerance tests, where we measured cortisol, ACTH. It turned out the ACTH levels were normal, so it was the autonomic nervous system that shut off the adrenal glands. So we identified that, and this is now research going back with head of pathology 30 years ago. So it's important to understand adrenal dysfunction is very common, far more common than straightforward and full-blown Addison's disease. If you want to counteract it, the adrenal support, we recommend 1 capsule twice a day to 2 capsules twice a day. It has all of the activated B vitamins for energetics and support. It has all of the glandulars that include glandulars from Argentinian adrenal, parotid, thymus, and spleen. So it's very, very complex. I usually recommend it along with their mitothyroid to his thyroid, adrenal, and hypothalamus, as well as activated T4, T3, and all of the trace minerals necessary for thyroid support. So take it along with their Nutrimedical. Some people require a little additional DHEA, 25 milligrams for a female, which is 1 tablet, and 2 or 50 milligrams for a male. and 100 milligrams of for either male or female of pregnenolone, which is made in the outer membrane of the mitochondria. So your mitochondria are intimately tied to adrenal function. So interesting how all these organs and systems are all tied and integrated together in a very complex web. We were talking yesterday with Ryan, and we got down quite far dealing with various nutraceuticals. And one of the things I think we talked about this morning I had a consult was how to deal with addictions to cocaine and other addictions to alcohol. The first thing is that anybody who has an addiction, which is about 7% of the population, to a drug or alcohol, has a brain chemical imbalance, and they're trying to get back to, quote, normal. So they medicate with drugs that temporarily make them feel better. But then, of course, they need more and more to get there, and they stay longer. They have a less and less time, quote, feeling under control with the use of their abusive drug, or to feel high, as they call it. They actually are trying to get back to normal. And eventually the hole gets deeper and deeper, so they can't recover. Now, in terms of support, what I recommend to start with is Calm Mind, BH4 biopterin, and SAM-ethyl, which is the S-adenosylmethionine, and and the tetrahydro biopterin, which is in the pteridine 4 or BH4 biopterin, and the SAM-ethyl, very important. Cognition Plus and Brain Power, because there's usually inflammation of the brain. The brain actually has neurotransmitter imbalances. And there may be deficiencies of the trace minerals like molybdenum that are in Minerals Plus to help bioconvert the amino acids to neurotransmitters. If you have chronic fatigue, we recommend Narival, which is the acetyltyrosine, with some BH4 biopterin. And a lot of time there also may be some endocrine imbalances like adrenal dysfunction, which is primarily autonomic. As I mentioned before, the ACTH levels may be normal. If you can check urine metabolites to see if you've corrected the problems. A lot of time, if people have had chronic use of drugs, they also have downregulation of different pathways, so they can't make neurotransmitters, or the calming ones like you're in Calm Mind, like GABA, to calm the nervous system down, so it's overexcitable. You can combine the functional medical approach, which includes measuring urine organic acids, like the organics test from lab testing direct through Genova Metametrics Lab, with therapy such as EMDR, eye movement desensitization therapy, with a PhD psychologist. That's very helpful for autonomic readjustment, because everyone with an addiction has a dysautonomia. Their autonomic nervous system is out of balance, keyed up, and the drugs just temporarily tend to adjust that, but doesn't fix it. So it doesn't matter if it's PTSD, alcoholism, or any drug, the basic mechanism is the same for all addictions. Back in a moment. Welcome back, and we're joined with Dr. Bob THIEL. Dr. Bob may be back later this week, tomorrow or Thursday. Dr. Bob, you've got some important things to talk about, some interesting kind of prophetic takes on analysis on the news. What would you like to talk about this couple segments?
Oh, we've got a bit. I'm going to try to be this somewhat orderly. Last month, I saw an article about a CNN interview with he's a former doctor, Karl zu Guttenberg, who was the defense minister of Germany. And he said that he felt that President Barack Obama was basically the most disconnected president that we've had. And so I'd seen that before, but somebody sent me a link to the actual YouTube last night, so I watched it. Well, then this morning, I'm looking through the news, and I've got this article by David Carl called Obama in Europe, The Cost of Coolness. It's like, what's that mean? This is from International Policy Digest. Basically what he was saying, and what Gutenberg was saying on CNN, is that because of policies and practices coming out of the administration, the Europeans are like rolling their eyes at the U.S. like, what are we supposed to do? We can't count on this. We don't know what's going to happen. And the other reason that this is all intriguing to me is yesterday afternoon, actually, we posted a YouTube video that was titled, let me get the exact title here, I'm sorry, getting to the end of it, 10 Steps Obama Has Taken Leading to the Rise of the Beast. And so I read all this morning, and when I'm going through this, I decided to look at something that was in the German press. Now, this is tricky because I don't read German, but I had it translated. And what's happened is apparently the Europeans have decided that they need to kind of get their military together. And so about a year ago, and I didn't know this until today or yesterday, about a year ago, the Dutch and the Germans came up with something called Project Griffin.
Right.
And this caught my attention because a griffin, if people are unaware, is a mythological creature. It kind of looks like a lion with eagle's wings on it. Right. And the Dutch actually their symbol is the lion, and the German is the eagles. So this is going to be the symbol of this new military cooperation. Right. And the reason that was interesting is there was a Catholic seer that most people have heard of. His name is Nostradamus. And I'd like to read something that he wrote in the 16th century. It says, "As a griffin, the king of Europe shall come, and he's going to lead a great army." And I wrote about this about 3 years ago. I said, a griffin. Now, there's different kind of griffins. I said, some of them actually come out of the sea. And I remembered the Bible prophecy warns about the beast of the sea rising up. And your readers can read about that in Revelation chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. So I thought, oh, this is intriguing. But the other thing that was intriguing to me, and I think we've talked about this on the air before, for any listeners who question, why would I ever mention non-biblical prophecies, it's my position, and I think it's yours as well, that when certain prophetic events happen, a lot of people are not going to believe that they're fulfilling biblical prophecy. Okay? The Bible warns about a leader rising up called the King of the North, which I believe is the King in Europe, which is what Nostradamus is referring to. The Bible warns about this beast power rising up, which I think it says the beast of the sea. And if you look at the different scriptures in the Old Testament, the sea appears to be the Mediterranean Sea, which is surrounded by Europe on the north. And although it's surrounded by the Arab countries in the south, historically, those countries are part of the old Roman Empire. And then, according to biblical prophecy, at some point in time, those countries are going to lose to the European power as well. Well, anyway, so this Griffin prophecy is interesting because my concern is when this leader rises up, and let's say I go on your show and say, hey, this leader's rising up, and look at this symbol they're using. This is a griffin. This is not good. This is a beast. The Bible warns about the beast. I can see supporters of this power pointing to non-biblical prophecies like this one of Nostradamus and say, oh, no, this is a good thing. And repeatedly, I see a lot of prophecies, non-biblical prophecies, that I believe are out there to deceive people to follow the wrong side. Now, at the outset of this segment, I mentioned watching Carl Gutenberg interview on CNN. He was with Christina Amanpour, or whatever, however she pronounced her last name. I think she probably is. Anyway, they asked him what was going to happen between relationships between the Obama administration and Germany. And he basically said, the Germans and the Americans don't see things the same. She asked if he thought the Obama administration would apologize for anything that they had done to Germany, publicly apologize. Right. He said no. He said no because this would hurt him politically in the United States. So she asked him, what's got to happen then? What basically, she didn't use the word appeasement, but I will right now. What will appease the Germans? And Eric Gutenberg said, well, the United States is going to have to do something to demonstrate basically that they trust us. Now, I don't know if your listeners are aware of this, but last Monday, a week ago Monday, the power in Europe somewhat changed. The U.S. Decided to appoint in charge of the U.S. Army a German brigadier general. I don't know if you're aware of that or not, but the U.S. Army now reports to a German general.
In other words, basically, this is integration of American forces under foreign leadership.
It is exactly that, except, the first step, I wouldn't say the first step, but back in 2009, right after my 2012 book came out, they put a French general, in charge of, as one of the two supreme allied commanders of NATO. There were two. And first time they ever put a continental European in charge was in 2009. And his name was, let's see if I get it, Stephen Abriel, and he was replaced by another French general by the name of Jean-Paul Palomares. Well, now we have a brigadier general, a German general, Brigadier General Marcus Laubenthal. He is now the commander of the U.S. Army. Okay, the commander of the U.S. Army is a German.
Now, I think that by itself should be sufficient grounds to impeach Obama, because he's supposed to be the commander-in-chief, and he cannot put our forces under a foreign power.
He has done so.
He's done so. I mean, but I think they first. I've said this before. We need to impeach Boehner first, because Boehner is a stumbling block. Because obviously the man is compromised. Because Republicans are not doing their job. They should have impeached Obama a long time ago. We don't have a president. We haven't had one since 2008, maybe before, because George Bush was another functionary for the globalists. He ended up being
kind of a caretaker the last couple of months he was in office.
Not only that, Bush is a caretaker as well as Clinton for the globalists. They're basically proxies for international globalism. And but Obama is by far the worst. I mean, the amount of debt he's racked up, the destruction of our ability to be the number one oil and gas producer in the world, the industrial espionage that's going on in America, stupid foreign policy that even Hillary Clinton is now criticizing, and even within their own party, the Democrats. And Obama just smirks and makes his funny faces. It's like, come on, guy, you're not the smartest guy in the room. You're probably the dumbest. The guy really is, he doesn't get it. He's like I would call a stupid version that's not quite as violent yet as Caligula, but I think he has desires to be so.
Well, when I watched the interview, I'm basically saying, look, Barack Obama had great acceptance from Europe when he was campaigning, and they liked him. I mean, look,
the Brandenburg Gate, yeah.
He got the Nobel Prize for Peace before he did anything.
Isn't that wild?
Lost that trust.
Absolutely. Back in just a moment with Dr. Bob Thiel, and I guess the rise of the beast. Obama's doing everything he can to kind of move it forward to that, isn't he?
More than most people have ever expected.
Right, and also our satellite integration system with the European system as well for security, right. For space security.
Right, the Galileo, and we should talk about that when we come back.
Yeah. What happened is that for years they fought against the idea of integrating with Galileo.
We're on multi-drug research.
Welcome back to the Nutrimedical Report, and let's go over those 10 points again, Dr. Bob, as to how Obama is, in a sense, preparing Europe to become the beast. We know that a lot of the technology developed in Europe is the most advanced in the world, including nuclear fusion technology. Although I know that the U.S. DARPA and the U.S. scientists have developed nuclear fusion technology over 50 years ago, in terms of commercial exploration and advancement at the Hadron Collider, which is basically what their contention is. You'll see the first, if you want a super country that develops fusion technology, will be Europe. They also have Galileo, which is the space-based imaging system, and because of our budget, they call it budgetary reasons, which is a pile of garbage. They integrated our space-based early warning system for nuclear missiles, etc., and our military with the Europeans. So basically, America is a vassal of an expanded Europe. And of course, with NATO expansion all the way through to attempted expansion to Georgia, we have a super empire, larger than the Roman Empire. I guess the largest empire in terms of its size was Genghis Khan, and this will soon be larger than that, covering not only the New World, but also all the way through to China. And in a sense, what's going on now is that Russia and China are going to be strong-armed into a position where they have to accept kind of unacceptable terms that they wouldn't ordinarily do. I don't see any real pushback by Russia so far against the slaughter in Donetsk and Slavyansk, although we see giant movements of their troops there. Russia keeps on saying they're going to do all kinds of actions against Europe, but it's kind of like if you want to call it, it's a situation where if Russia does anything, it'll be very catastrophic. So,
Well, you mentioned to me about trying to get to this list of 10. I'm see if we can do this in a segment.
Let's do that.
Maybe I can pull it off.
And then we can have you back to do an expansion.
When I wrote a book about 2012. So back in 2009, I wrote that Barack Obama had pledged increased cooperation with Europeans, that while cooperation can be good, that I felt this would lead to the rise of the prophesied King of the North. And since that came out, there's 10 things I'm going to try to go through here. One is that he encouraged the final approval of the Lisbon Treaty. Back in 2009, in October, the Czech president said he wouldn't sign this particular agreement. So we sent Vice President Biden over there about a week or two later. And then on the 1st of November 2009, Václav Klaus, who was the president of the Czech Republic, signed it. And I saw him on either BBC America or NV or something, and they translated him into English, and he said he just signed away the sovereignty of his country. Then the next week after he did so, actually on the 3rd of November, it was reported that President Obama publicly expressed his support for him doing that. So that's one thing he did. Then when it started to fall apart with Greece, he called up Angela Merkel and nudged her to provide financial support to keep Greece going, to keep the Union going. And in December of 2010, it was announced the United States, quote, made an extraordinary commitment of money to support the European Union. He gave 250 billion euros to support this stuff, this European financial stability facility. So that's one thing the U.S. did. The third thing is, and you mentioned it before, this was probably the most dramatic prediction that was in my old 2012 book, is I talked about this Galileo system. When I wrote that the United States was having problems with its GPS and may decide to rely on Europe's Galileo system for part of its own defense, a spokesperson for the U.S. Air Force said that was wrong. But then 6 months later, a general of the Air Force said, well, we do have a problem. And then the next summer, the United States agreed.
What's their problem? I took care of employees working on the military-grade GPS in Colorado Springs, and this idea that there's a problem is total hogwash.
Well, the problem is that they've got older satellites they're not intending to replace.
Oh, come on. They had always had handoff. You know what, when I hear the military come up with a stupid excuse like that, they had the system fine-tuned and fully operational by the mid-'90s, so when they say they have a problem, they had GPS coordinates down to a tolerance of 1.5 centimeters, including vertical dimension from space.
Yeah, but they haven't done that for the rest of us, so...
No, they did it for the military.
Yeah.
So the military has a system that literally has mapped every square centimeter of the planet, including Antarctica, down to a tolerance of 1.5 centimeters. So the idea that the U.S. military had to join with Galileo is a geopolitical and globalist cooperation plan. It had nothing to do with U.S. military needing help. It didn't need help.
Oh, but that is what they ended up doing.
Of course, this is what all our global policy, because we don't have a president. We have a globalist puppet who's a cooperative evil puppet with globalism. This is not an American president. Why do we address him as president? He's not.
Well, he was elected president, but we'll get past that.
Yeah, he's not a president. This guy is just a globalist banker puppet, and again, he's a very cooperative puppet. He's evil, and we don't want to call it that. And then he sort of tantrums and fits because he's a narcissist like Caligula, and he really has the potential to be much more evil than Caligula. So if you know how bad Caligula was, you get an idea just where Obama's coming from. The man is out of his mind.
Well, another thing that happened is that we publicly are trusting the Europeans so much that we've decided to ignore Europe to pivot toward Asia. And it reminds me of a story in the Old Testament where God says, you guys were worried about this one power, so that's why you ended up getting a king, which I told you don't get. And so what the U.S. is doing now is the U.S. say, well, maybe China's this big threat, so we're going to let Europe be on its own because we trust them, which I think is a mistake. We've also been pushing them to develop their military, and as you mentioned before, they also have all this technology. One of the things I warned about in my 2012 book was that the Large Hadron Collider that you mentioned before is that they're going to develop some technology out of that that the U.S. may not get access to.
Well, the U.S. already has access. I know because I work with Space Command. The U.S. will pretend they don't have access because they want the power to shift toward a new super empire of Europe, which runs all our money. Our Fed Reserve System, the chairwoman and on the board is the Queen of the Netherlands. Okay, so we need to understand that we're just proxies for an expanded European empire, and we were recaptured with the Banking Act in 1913. So America has sequentially been sucked back into the European vortex of this super empire, and the rise of the beast empire, Obama is fully complicit with it because his boss is George Soros, and the same people that run the banks run every war. So, I think we should realize that Europe is a rising empire.
Right, and people don't see it. As I mentioned on your program before, in Revelation chapter 13, verse 4, it says, "Who is like the beast? Who is able to make war with him?" We're talking about a power that's going to have technology, something that people just didn't expect. But when I was writing this morning, it occurred to me, prior to World War II, Neville Chamberlain and the mass media at the time thought, Adolf Hitler's a good guy. They would talk to him, they would appease him. They thought that was going to bring peace in their day. And we're trying to appease the Germans by, amongst other things, as I mentioned earlier, putting a German general in charge of the army. I mean, my father, to this day, when I mentioned that one of my sons bought a German car, he's like, but we fought against Germany. And okay,
amazing,
I'm not telling people they couldn't buy a German car, but it should be astounding that the United States Army is going to report to a German general.
Yeah,
absolutely astounding. I've got to think most people in World War II, the soldiers who died there, would be figuratively turning over their graves now if they heard this one.
Well, I think that what we should see happening, I'm going to make a kind of a wild prediction of 3 items I expect to come out of Europe. The first is the first commercial nuclear fusion technology that will give Europe limitless power. That's
likely.
That's very likely. And that's probably going to happen in the next 10 to 15 years, max. It already exists, but again, it's in our space fleets, like Aurora space fleets, etc., and they don't want it to leak out that America already has this. But they're going to have it showcase in Europe. The second thing is genetic research. I expect that genetic research in Europe is going to allow them to start wiping out disease. The research in Europe is much less hamstrung like the FDA. In fact, we just got the research articles and links directly by the 23andMe, which basically last December put a hammerlock on companies that can actually tell your genetics, so they can tell which nutraceuticals you need to take, what drugs will work for your cancer. I mean, you can send your specimens off now. There's even a test now to tell you if you have cancer called an anti-malignant test. It'll tell you got cancer anywhere in your body. It won't tell you where it is, but it tells you got cancer. There's also other very accurate gene tests that are coming out. So I think genetics. And the third area I expect to happen is supercomputers. And we're not talking about the hidden ones that the NSA has. I think that the computing technology developed in Europe is going to outstrip all of the countries. So those are the 3 areas: energetics, genetics, and supercomputing that will be open to the public. And Europe will rise as the great empire. Of course, America is part of that great empire. The real financial system actually comes from America. A lot of the hidden power is America, the dragon nation. America.